There are some signs that don't arrive with clarity. They don't shout. They don't explain themselves, but they linger quietly. And if you're really paying attention during no contact, you might start to feel it. An energy shift. A subtle reach from someone who isn't saying they're hurting, but is. Today, that's exactly what we're going to explore. A key sign that your ex is silently struggling, even if, on the surface, everything says otherwise. This wasn't something I planned to talk about. It didn't come from a strategy board or a content calendar. It came from something deeper, a memory, a reflection. One of those unexpected moments where life suddenly places something old in your hands again and quietly asks, can you see it differently now? So here we are. Today, I'm going to share something personal. Not for drama, not for sympathy, but because I truly believe this. Some of the most meaningful lessons come from the things we lived before we understood them. And if you're in that quiet, in-between space right now, trying to hold on to your dignity while your heart is still catching up, then I hope what I share brings you a little clarity, a little peace. Because once you see this sign, you won't be able to unsee it. You'll know what it means, you'll know what it doesn't, and you'll be able to move through it. Not with desperation, but with self-respect. Let's get into it. And hey, if you're new here, or if this message touches something deep inside you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to Stoic Station. It helps the channel grow, but more importantly, it helps this kind of message reach someone else. Someone who needs it, just like you once did. Let's begin. I never set out to become the kind of man who journals. It started unintentionally, just scribbles here and there on restless nights. But over time, those scribbles turned into pages, and those pages became something more, a mirror. Not of who I was pretending to be, but who I truly was when no one else was watching. One evening, I was flipping through one of those old notebooks, half out of curiosity, half out of habit, when a photograph slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I stared at it for a long moment. It was her and me. One of those photo booth snapshots where everything is playful and light. We were laughing, arms around each other, faces full of ease, like we belonged in that frame, untouched by time. And in that instant, something inside me paused. The noise fell away. And for the first time in a long time, I remembered not just her, but the man I was beside her. A version of me who still believed in permanence, who still thought connection like that could survive anything, as long as the love was real. That's what journaling does when you allow it to become more than a habit. It doesn't just help you track your days, it teaches you to track your becoming. It reveals the evolution you can't always see in the mirror. And if you're going through something like no contact right now, I'll say this: don't journal to fix the past. Don't journal to get her back. Do it to come home to yourself. Because some of the most important conversations you'll ever have are the ones you have with your own truth. On paper, in silence, with no one else to impress. And as I held that picture in my hand, memories began surfacing. Memories I had quietly filed away, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Our first date was simple. We went bowling, nothing fancy, but something about that night felt effortless, like we'd known each other forever. There were two women bowling in the next lane, strangers. And halfway through the game, we all started talking, laughing, joking around. At some point they asked, "How long have you two been together?" We looked at each other and smiled. "It's our first date," we said. And everyone laughed. That's the kind of moment that makes you believe in something bigger than coincidence. Like maybe the universe had finally delivered the one you'd been waiting for. Maybe you've had a moment like that too. A moment where the chemistry was so strong it felt sacred, where you didn't just fall for someone, you recognized them. But here's the quiet truth that takes longer to understand. Just because a connection feels destined doesn't mean it's meant to last forever. Sometimes that kind of spark is meant to wake something in you, not stay with you. Sometimes the magic at the beginning isn't a promise, it's an invitation to grow. And that growth often comes through pain. When things between us began to shift, I didn't know how to respond. I tried harder. I reached out more. I went into fix-it mode, thinking love was supposed to solve everything. If something felt off, I wanted to talk about it. If I sensed distance, I leaned in. But the more I tried to close the space between us, the more she seemed to retreat. What I didn't realize back then is that relationships aren't maintained through intensity. They're maintained through understanding. And I didn't yet understand myself. I didn't know about anxious attachment or how early experiences shape our fears of abandonment. I didn't understand how emotional wounds, both hers and mine, had quietly followed us into something that once felt so easy. I just thought, if I love enough, it will work. But love, without awareness, turns into control, into over-explaining, into emotional chasing disguised as devotion. And eventually, it all starts to unravel, not because the feelings weren't real, but because the foundation was never truly safe for either of us. That was one of the most sobering truths I had to face. I had been trying to build emotional intimacy on soil I hadn't even studied. I didn't know how deep my own roots went, or how fragile hers were. So when she started pulling away, I chased, not physically, but emotionally. I tried to reassure her. I tried to make things right. But each attempt only pushed her further, until one day she just said it. "This isn't going to work. You're too insecure." I remember hearing those words like a punch to the chest. But here's what I've come to believe. Sometimes the words that hurt the most are also the ones that force us to wake up. It would have been easy to be defensive, to say, "You're wrong, I was trying." And maybe I was. But trying is not the same as understanding, and love without understanding eventually collapses under its own weight. So I stopped reaching out. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I had to face the man in the mirror. And what that man needed wasn't another apology. He didn't need another chance with her. What he needed was to finally sit with himself, to see what all the noise had been hiding. That's where real healing began, not in fixing the past, but in learning how to stop losing myself in the future I had imagined with someone who no longer stood beside me. Journaling helped. Quiet mornings helped. Long walks with no music helped. But most of all, it was the willingness to tell the truth, to stop romanticizing the pain and start understanding the pattern. So if you're in that place now, where the silence is loud and the memories keep replaying, I'll offer you this. The version of you that shared those joyful moments is still here. But he's evolving now, and that evolution doesn't require her to return. It just requires you to stay. Stay with your truth. Stay with your discomfort. Stay with your growth. Because the more you do, the more you'll see. This isn't about getting her back. It's about getting you back. And that changes everything. And while all of that, the memories, the emotional unraveling, the deep self-reflection, helped me understand what happened, there came a point where I had to ask myself a harder question. What am I going to do with this pain now? Because awareness is only the beginning. What you choose to do after the silence, that's what shapes the man you become next. There comes a moment, one sentence, one conversation, one look, where everything you've been holding together quietly begins to fall apart. For me, it was just a few words. "You're too insecure. I can't do this anymore." She said it calmly, but there was no invitation for discussion, no softness behind the statement. It was the kind of line you don't come back from. And even though I didn't say much in response, inside, it hit like a tidal wave. I remember walking home that night with a silence inside me I hadn't felt before. Not the kind that begs for distraction, but the kind that demands your full presence. The kind that says, you need to look at this now. I could have fought it, I could have argued, but I didn't, because on some level I knew she wasn't wrong, not entirely. There was a part of me that had become too reactive, too uncertain, too dependent on her for emotional stability. I hadn't known it at the time, but I was carrying wounds that had nothing to do with her. Wounds that had quietly shaped the way I loved, the way I chased, the way I feared being left. That breakup didn't just end a relationship, it shattered an illusion, the illusion that love on its own was enough. And as painful as it was, it became the opening I needed. Not an ending, but a threshold. In the days that followed, I didn't reach out. I didn't explain or try to fix what was already gone. Instead, I got quiet. Not for her, but for me. For the first time in a long time, I stopped running from myself. That's when I picked up books on masculinity, not the loud, performative kind, but the grounded, inner discipline kind. I started listening to voices I'd ignored, voices that spoke about boundaries, self-worth, purpose, emotional self-regulation, and slowly I began to understand why things had unfolded the way they had. The biggest shift came when I chose no contact, not as a tactic to make her miss me, but as a commitment to stop abandoning myself. Because that's the mistake so many of us make. We think silence is about them. We think pulling back is a game, a trick, a strategy to stir up interest. But real no contact is not about them at all. It's about drawing a line between who you were and who you're becoming. It's about no longer offering your presence where your value wasn't seen. And it's about allowing space, not just for her to reflect, but for you to rebuild something stronger than what got broken. And that's when the unexpected happened. 3 weeks in, no calls, no messages, no posts, nothing from me. Then one night, my phone lit up. It was her. The message was long, scattered, emotional. It spilled out like a storm that had been building behind closed doors. She blamed me for things I had already owned. She criticized how I handled the relationship, said I never listened, never really understood her. She recounted moments I had long forgotten and wrapped them in conclusions that felt unrecognizable to me. And yet, for all the passion in her words, the ending was still the same. We can never be together. I just needed to say this. I hope you find what you're looking for. I remember sitting there, reading her message in silence. A younger version of me would have jumped into a reply, would have tried to correct the narrative, defend my side, remind her of the good, of what we once had. But I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood what was happening. That message wasn't closure, it wasn't peace. It was a search for relief. You see, when someone walks away from you, they usually do it from a place of emotional overwhelm, and in the early stages, they often feel empowered by that choice, free, in control. But when you remove your energy completely, when you no longer chase, explain, or plead, you take away their ability to self-regulate through your response. And that creates discomfort. Suddenly, their sense of control starts slipping, and instead of finding peace in your absence, they feel unrest. So they reach out, not because they want to reconnect, but because they want to know they still matter, that they still have access to your attention, that if they say something strong enough, you'll break your silence. And when you don't, when you remain calm, measured, non-reactive, it unravels their emotional certainty. That's the key sign your ex is actually hurting during no contact. Not when they say they miss you, not even when they say they don't, but when they reach out in confusion, frustration, or emotional urgency after you've said nothing at all. That's when you know the silence is working. Not to manipulate, but to reveal. Because silence doesn't just create distance, it creates contrast. And that contrast makes your absence undeniable. Here's the twist most men never expect. They won't always come back with softness. Sometimes they come back with blame, with accusations, with emotional outbursts. And if you're not grounded, you'll take the bait. You'll step right back into the role they left you in, the man who needs to be heard, the man who needs to explain. Don't. Instead, take a breath. Let the message sit. Read between the lines. Because what they're really saying is, I don't know who you are anymore, and that scares me. And that's why, after all the silence, they finally start talking. The irony is sharp. They asked for space. They wanted distance. They said, I need time to figure things out. So you respected that. You vanished. And now, suddenly, they're curious again. It's not coincidence. It's psychology. The moment you stop performing, they start wondering who you've become. The moment you stop offering updates, they begin to fill in the blanks. And because they no longer control the narrative, they reach out, not always to rebuild, but to confirm, do I still have influence over you? What you do in that moment determines everything, because your response, or lack of it, either restores the old dynamic or reinforces the new one. You see, they're not always trying to rekindle the relationship. Often, they're just trying to see if the version of you that used to chase still exists. The version that begged, that needed closure, that feared being forgotten. But if you've done the work, if you've been silent not just outwardly, but inwardly, you'll realize you no longer need what you once craved. And that's when your healing becomes unshakable. Because true power isn't in how you respond. It's in the restraint to let silence speak for you. Let it say, I'm not the same man you left. Let it say, I'm building a life where my worth isn't measured by your attention. Let it say, I've outgrown the need to be chosen by someone who walked away. And if one day she speaks again, whether in love, in anger, or in regret, let her speak to the man you've become. The one who doesn't need to be rescued, repaired, or reclaimed. Only respected. And once the silence has settled in, once you've begun to stand on your own without reaching, without explaining, there's something else that tends to unfold. They respond. Maybe not in the way you hoped, and often not for the reasons you imagine, but they reach out. And when they do, what you choose to do next becomes just as important as everything you've done so far. Because their words may be familiar, but you are not the same man who used to receive them. What you need to know is this. Not all texts from your ex during no contact mean the same thing. And how you handle each one matters far more than whether they reach out or not. Because their words may come wrapped in emotion, but underneath is always a motive. Not necessarily malicious, but human, emotional, and often unconscious. The first kind is pure heat, blame, frustration, maybe even insults disguised as truth. It's meant to provoke, to see if the old version of you will resurface, the one who argued, defended, chased. If you take that bait, you've surrendered the growth you've been working toward. But if you don't, if you stand your ground with quiet strength, you set a new standard. A calm boundary like, I'm open to respectful conversation, but not if it continues in this tone, is more powerful than any emotional comeback. Because now, she's not just hearing your words, she's meeting your new energy, and she either rises to meet it or reveals she never could. The second is quieter, but sharper. the guilt trip. It usually arrives coated in civility, but underneath, you're still the villain. She's the misunderstood one. She paints a story where your mistakes become the only mistakes, and her decisions are merely reactions to your inadequacy. This one can be dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it sounds reasonable. And if you're still questioning your worth, you'll fall into explaining, justifying, apologizing endlessly for things you've already owned. Instead, you respond with emotional clarity. A message like, "I take responsibility for my part, and I truly wish things had gone differently. I respect your decision and wish you peace," isn't weakness, it's maturity. You speak once, and you don't follow up. That kind of restraint sends a message far louder than any apology ever could. Then there's the most complex one, the emotional confession. "I miss you. You were my person. I haven't stopped thinking about you." The words you wanted to hear, the softness you hoped might return. But if you read slowly, you'll see it. The conclusion hasn't changed. We still can't be together. This isn't an invitation to rebuild. It's a search for reassurance. She doesn't want the relationship. She wants to know that she could still have it, if she chose to. That she hasn't lost all access to your emotional energy. And this is where many men slip. They mistake sentiment for sincerity. They mistake emotional vulnerability for commitment. So they lean back in, offer warmth, open the door again. And just like that, the dynamic resets to what it was. Her choosing when to pull close and when to disappear. But if you've grown, if you've truly changed, you'll respond differently. You'll match her honesty, but stay rooted in your strength. A response like, "Of course I care. I'll always value what we had." But love only works when two people are equally willing to build something real. "I'm focusing on my healing now. I wish you peace," honors your feelings without sacrificing your dignity. It's not a wall, it's a mirror, and it reflects back to her the man she underestimated. When you do this right, when you don't react, don't chase, don't explain, the result may surprise you. She might come back. Not in theory, not in passing, but in person. I've seen it happen. 2 days after setting a firm boundary, she showed up at my door, wanting to talk, asking if maybe we could try again. But here's what I want you to understand. Her return wasn't the reward. The real reward was internal. It was the stillness I had built in her absence, the man I had become in the silence, the peace I had earned by no longer negotiating with someone who once saw me as disposable. You don't win when she comes back. You win when you no longer need her to, because that's the truth most men avoid, the thing we resist facing. If you are still trying to convince someone to love you, if you are still hoping to say the right thing, send the right message, prove your worth in just the right way, then you have already abandoned yourself. Summary. Let that settle for a second. Your love is not meant to be a performance. It is not a test you must pass, or a burden you must carry alone. You are not meant to exist in a space where your presence is tolerated, where your effort is dismissed, where your worth is questioned at every turn. You are meant to be chosen, fully, clearly, without hesitation. And if someone can't offer you that, no matter how strong the connection once was, no matter how many memories you built, then the most courageous thing you can do is let them go. Because the man who finally learns to love himself deeply, honestly, and without condition, becomes the kind of man others don't want to lose. Not because he's hard to reach, not because he plays games, but because his peace is real, and his presence is no longer given away cheaply. So when the message comes, and it will, pause, breathe, read between the lines, then answer not from your wounds, but from your healing. And let your response or your silence speak the one truth that changes everything. You no longer need to be chosen by someone else to finally choose yourself. If anything in this message resonated with you, even in a quiet, subtle way, I'd truly love to hear from you. Share your reflections in the comments below. I read every one, and they matter. If you found even a spark of value here, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Stoic Station. It may seem like a small gesture, but it goes a long way. You could be helping this message reach someone else, someone who's walking through the same quiet storm you've weathered. Thank you, truly, for being here and for choosing to grow with strength, with grace, and with dignity. Until next time, stay grounded, stay steady.